Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin May. I'm the co-founder and editor of Tnooz.com. So welcome to everybody for joining us today. We have yet another webinar, and we're delighted to say that Amadeus has joined us yet again for this title. This is going to be a good one: How to Market and Sell Unbundled Travel. Now, as we know, suppliers such as airlines and hotels have, they've really been rolling out significant merchandising strategies to boost the revenues from ancillary travel products over the last few years. But also getting squeezed in the process are travellers who now must kind of grapple with the complexity of fares, packages, choices, and all these different add-ons. So can we say this is the new normal? If the unbundled travel services are the new normal, travellers are actually now changing how they shop, book, pack and travel. So as a result, suppliers obviously need to think differently and how they market and how they sell to these travellers. So, where does this all go? How far can unbundling go, really, before it starts backfiring? And how does the industry adapt to better serve this new traveller persona, in inverted commas? So, we're delighted to say that we have Amadeus along with us today. I'm Kevin May. Joining us on the line from the driveway of his house today is Quinn. He's always in Connecticut, but as many of you are aware, on the East Coast, Connecticut is one of many states that has been hit by the storms of the last 24 hours. So Gene will be joining us later. We have a great panel for you this morning. Brian Beard from Amadeus. He's Executive Travel Technology and Consulting at Amadeus. And he's joined by Scott Gillespie, who is the author of the Gillespie's Guide to Travel and Procurement. He's also the founder at Travel Analytics. So two great guys. Many of you that will have listened in to some of Amadeus webinars before will have heard Brian. He's great. We really like Brian. Some of the things that he's done with us over the last year or so have just been fantastic. And you can, in fact, go and listen to all those previously. Anyway, they're all stored on tnooz.com, which leads me nicely to tell you that we are recording the entire event today. So we'll put that on tnooz.com within the next 12-24 hours, just time withstanding, and obviously all the slides will also be hosted on that same post. So, as many of you are aware, we always like to throw in a few polls as we're going through the webinar this afternoon. So, as always, we're just going to give you a little tester. Let me launch the poll for you here. And this is: where are you located? You can see the options there. If you'd all like to cast your votes. I think we'll launch the poll now. Okay, I'm hoping to share those results with you. I'm running all this by myself today, so hopefully you can see those results. So 52% of you are in North America, 37% of you are in Europe, Middle East and Africa, 5% Latin America, 7% in Asia Pacific. Well done to those in Asia Pacific. It's obviously very late in the day for you, so thank you very much for that. So we're now going to go on to the second poll, which is taking us very nicely into what we're actually here to discuss today, and this one should really kind of set the scene for you a little bit. So, as a traveller, are you less likely or more likely to buy bundles of travel products, i.e. airline tickets, food and beverage, or other combinations? So are you more likely or less likely? Think of yourselves as consumer travellers rather than industry people for a second. Okay, I'm now going to close the poll. Hopefully you will see the results. It's a little fiddly this end. Normally my glamorous assistant does this for me. So sharing here. So 47% of you say you're more likely. 53%, over half of you, so the majority say you are less likely. So interesting food for thought, and we hope that that does kind of set the scene for you all today. So let's go back to the main presentation, and I'd be really pleased now to introduce Scott. So this is Scott Gillespie. As I said, he's the author of the Gillespie's Guide to Travel and Procurement. He's also, as I say, the founder of Travel Analytics, and he's going to talk us through and kind of set the scene before Brian comes in afterwards. So Scott, good afternoon here from the UK. Good morning to you in the US. Hope you're well, and the stage is now yours, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining on this day. For many of us in North America, it's a hectic day for anybody involved in the travel industry, courtesy of Sandy. So appreciate your investing some time here. So let's have a look at the types of ancillary revenues that are frequently found. So next, please. Yep. So you can see that these are some of the more popular ones that are available to discuss in terms of ancillary revenues. It's got it organized a bit. In the upper left-hand corner, we're really talking about those things that a traveler tends to experience when they're thinking about the flight that they're going to take. The upper right-hand corner are some additional charges, sources of revenue that might not be as flight-specific, but certainly are relevant to the traveler. Both of those top boxes are very much controlled and influenced and shaped by the airline in terms of the consumer's experience and perception of value and that sort of thing. And then below the line, we've got some sources of revenue that are typically more commission-oriented, things that the airline doesn't control but do have some impact on the traveler's experience. This is probably a decent list, but by no means an exhaustive list, and the combinations and creativity with which airlines are plumbing this topic is growing. It continues to grow, and I think that sets up the observation that many of us would agree with on the next slide. It can be overwhelming. There's a lot of choice being made to travelers, and at some point that becomes counterproductive, and that's really the question that we've got teed up on the next one, which is, should we expect the airlines to bundle some of these choices together, such as a cinema ticket or a movie ticket combined with a free drink, or it's not really free, but a popcorn and a soda? Do you want to pay a couple pounds more, a couple of euros more, a couple of dollars more in addition to your ticket price in order to have that bundled together, or would you rather have that unbundled and be free to choose what you wish to purchase? Right. So let's take a look now at kind of the theory behind bundling. And what we've got here is a pretty simple diagram. On the upper axis, the vertical axis, we're going to look at how the cost to the traveler behaves depending on the horizontal axis, whether there's just one bundle on the left all the way out to the far right, which the consumer or the traveler may have many, many choices. So let's have a look at the first line. Right, so what we see here is that when consumers are presented with one bundle on the left-hand side, it's a relatively high cost to them because they're going to have to, many of them, take on features that they wouldn't normally wish to pay for. But because it's part of the bundle, it represents unwanted features, and those have a cost that they wouldn't normally pay for. The more choices you give the consumer, the cost of those unwanted features drops down and eventually goes to zero. If you can give the consumer all the choices they might wish, they can mix and match, customize their purchase to exactly what they want and avoid all the unwanted features and avoid all the cost of those unwanted features. All right, so now let's take a look at another cost that is happening, and that is the cost of the shopper's time, in this case the traveler's time. So obviously the more choices they've got to sort through, the more time and frankly the more frustration the traveler is going to incur as they sort through those options. So that's the trade-off. We can reduce the cost of unwanted features by offering more options, but we're going to require a bigger investment and a more, some might say, painful process in terms of the shopper's cost of their time necessary to sort through all those options. So in the next slide, what we're going to reveal is that travelers, like many of us, want to minimize the total cost of these two. So we're not looking at the lowest point of the red. We're not looking at the lowest point of the red or the blue. We're looking at the lowest point of the sum of the two, and that's the total shopping cost. And as you can see now with the next build here, that the lowest cost of these two combined cost elements produces kind of a medium number of choices in this illustrative example. So that's really what the traveler's trying to do, right? They're trying to get through the assortment of choices in a reasonable amount of time that kind of balances out those two costs. So that's the general theory of bundling. Let's take a look now at when bundling, under what conditions bundling makes sense. So really, if either of these two things, noted by the red line, if the shopper's time is very valuable, notice by the vertical orientation of the red line, or the unwanted features don't cost too much, if there's little incremental cost involved in the assortment of features, if either of those two things are happening in the offer, then the total shopping cost, shown by the bottom of the black line, suggests that there should be fewer bundles offered. It can be more attractive to simply save the traveler time, and the traveler's not going to incur much cost. So those are some conditions where it makes great sense to offer a few, relatively small number of bundled options. In contrast to the next case, when it makes no sense to bundle, and under these conditions, if either the unwanted features, noted by the blue line, cost a lot, or the shopper's time is not valuable, then we're going to see typically a conclusion that it's better to offer the travelers or the shoppers a number of discrete choices, or kind of a higher number of bundled options for them to sort through and choose from. Right. So with that, pretty obvious in general conclusions. Generally, it makes sense to create bundles for business travelers, and we would expect to see a lot of unbundling for leisure travelers. And in fact, I think that's what we do see with many of the low-cost carriers. We see a wide variety of options that travelers can choose, namely in the theory of trying to get the traveler's cost down to exactly the lowest point, which still represents value for money for that particular traveler. All right, so in terms of some marketing implications, one is that airlines might want to gravitate toward fare families, a fairly simple form of bundling. I think we see Air Canada do this. We see Air New Zealand do this. It's certainly possible to have airlines create relatively straightforward sets of bundles in terms of their features. That's certainly going to be probably more gravitated towards the business traveler. In addition, the airlines are certainly going to be working on creating traveler personas, trying to anticipate under a set number of characteristics. They'll create personas that they believe then can be made appropriate for particular and tailored bundles. So bundles that fit those particular traveler personas, there may be a half a dozen, perhaps a dozen traveler personas, something like that, and there may be 2 or 3 bundles for each of those. But, and this is eventually, because the industry has not yet cracked this nut, we will get, assuming that we've got advances with regard to the next slide, kind of the holy grail for the airline industry, which is really to create these rich, deep, very meaningful customer profiles. Once the airlines have these in place, then we can get to the point of the next slide, which is the airline's ability to conduct predictive bundling. So let's take a look at what that might mean in terms of an example. This is actually the source of data, so we'll start here. So in terms of predictive bundling, an airline should have or will have access to any of these data elements in terms of past purchases, some pretty granular detail regarding that. In terms of the current search parameters that the traveler or the shopper may enter in the search box, we're going to understand those things. And then the other elements on the page, you can appreciate how an airline could pull all of that information together in an effort to create a tailored bundle predicated on what the airline understands about the customer. All right. So all well and good. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. This first one is a fairly straightforward one, probably oriented toward a business traveler. Certainly seeing those offered out there in the marketplace today. The second one might be an example more suited to a family, somebody who's booking for a couple of travelers. So you might create an opportunity to have a bit of a respite at the airport with a lounge pass, likely to use some food and beverage requirements or entertainment, so perhaps a credit could be included in that. And then finally, for those that are perhaps associated with traveling to Las Vegas or Monaco, those that are willing to take a little bit more risk, you might offer them a bundle of chances, right? You might get a better upgrade, you might get an empty seat, you might get a 50% off the change fee if you need it, that sort of thing. So actually no commitments made by the airline, but just kind of a promise on best available effort, something like that. So simple examples, but I hope you can appreciate how those might be applied. When we think about the challenges of making predictive bundling work well, certainly would like to consider some of these points. What are the appropriate data sources? Can the data be pulled together and applied to draw good conclusions that are going to be effective in terms of marketing, presenting the right offer at the right time? And then how and when and where do you place these bundles in the offer? So during the online shopping stage, do you put it where in the booking path do you put these bundles? What about the kiosk or other forms of check-in? And then certainly what are the opportunities to apply bundled sales of ancillary revenues via the mobile? And the last point I'll end on, just because it's near and dear to my heart, is the potential conflict for corporate T&E policies to conflict with elements that might be in the bundle. So for example, a company may not wish to reimburse for movies or onboard food and beverage. So small example, but for the corporate travel managers out there, I think you're going to have to address in the near future how to reconcile bundles with corporate policies. Great. Well, with that, Kevin, thanks very much. I'll turn it back over to you, and look forward to hearing from Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I mean, what I didn't say to everybody at the beginning is that we will have a 10-15 minutes at the end, hopefully, for questions and answers. And you are more than welcome to send in your questions to our panel. Hopefully, Quinn will be joining us from his driveway as well. But you can send those questions by using the little button on the right-hand side of your dashboard, which says very simply questions. So we've had a few couple come in already. So thank you very much to those that have sent those in. So a question that relates, another poll question that relates specifically to the last part of Scott's presentation there. And it is, as a consumer, how concerned are you about travel providers using your social graph to create personalized offers for you? So you got a couple of options there. No way, it's totally creepy. Somewhat concerned, indifferent, eager to share my data and receive customized offers. So let's see what you all think. And I might come back to you, Scott, just very briefly before we hand over to Brian, just to get your reaction to the results of this. We've almost got everyone's vote, and I will hopefully share those results now. So only 11% say no way, it's totally creepy, and it's pretty evenly split there. So 34% say somewhat concerned, 27% are indifferent, and 28% say they're quite eager. I mean, Scott, is that does that chime in with what you've been hearing, or your sense of where people are on this kind of sharing their social data?
Yeah, I'd say this looks pretty reasonable, and I think largely what folks are trying to understand is really how does this get applied in practice? What's it actually going to result in? Is it going to be providing value to me and not violating anything that I might consider really private in terms of my data sources? If the airlines can do a good job, a responsible job, an effective job of creating, well-bundled, properly tailored products that save me time as a shopper, I would think that these scores would actually shift more to the eager level.
Okay, well, those listening in that voted, or that 11% of you that said no way, it's totally creepy, maybe you'd like to throw in a question or at least a comment to explain later on during the Q&A why. And indeed, those at the opposite end, the 28% of you that said they were eager to, maybe you might have a question or a comment to make as well. So thank you very much to those that voted. We now go to question number 4, which kind of leads us nicely into Mr. Beard's presentation. So let me just bring up number 4 here, which is, which of these airline products revenue components will grow most significantly or more significantly? Travel retail, so those extra bits, the hotel, the car, the trip insurance. Baggage fees, sale of frequent flyer data, partner miles, that kind of thing, or other a la carte services. Now I'm predicting, well, I did predict what I thought would be the most popular one here, and I'm just looking at the votes starting to come in. I was slightly nervous that I'd selected the wrong one, but I think I'm justified now, which is great. So 3/4 of you have voted. We'll just wait a few more moments, and then I think we will launch the results of this poll. So, a couple of you still to vote. Right, there we go. So almost half of you, and this was very low initially as people started voting, but almost half of you, 44%, said travel retail. Second was other a la carte, and I think we could probably explore what other a la carte is later on if we have time. 20% baggage fees, just 10% on the frequent flyer partner miles. So thank you very much to everybody for voting there. We do have one more poll later on during Brian's presentation, which we'll dive in, which will dovetail in with some of the things that he's talking about. But I'm very delighted to welcome Brian Beard. As I said, he's an executive travel technology and consulting at Amadeus. He's in the US today, not on the East Coast, so which is great for him. So, but very delighted to have Brian back. Hello again, and welcome. And I'd like you to talk us through your slides, please, Brian.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kevin, and thanks to everybody for joining. Well, let's go on to the first slide. Okay, so obviously, when we look out in the industry today, and we look at it from a traveler perspective, I mean, there's unprecedented complexity that faces both leisure and business travelers. I deal more with on the business side of the house, but of course, as a leisure traveler, and many of you, or all of you do both, and we look at the proliferation of choices. And the key thing here is that it's not stopping, right? Do you check bags or you take bags on the plane? And do you board early or take the risk of not being able to, get your bag on the plane? And it's funny because it's almost a game. And I travel every week, and I watch people, and they're like, do I pay the extra money? Do I sit and wait in zone 3, and hopefully I can find a spot for my bag? And you watch people on the frustration level and the anger when they realize they have to plane check their bag is quite interesting. And of course, that's going to change over time, because I think at some point, it'll be adverse. The frustration level will have an adverse reaction on travel itself, especially airline travel. Same thing with you bring in food versus food on the planes. Obviously that changes depending on the airline that you're traveling on. Or even Wi-Fi. And this is a hotel one. It's also an airport one. It's also, do you bring your own Wi-Fi or take the risk that the Wi-Fi being offered is A, too expensive, B, unusable because it's too slow. And it really depends on where you are in the world and what airport you're at and what hotel you're at, depending on what they have. And so there's a lot of risks and a lot of choices that the travelers must make. And really creating a lot of frustration and inconvenience. Of course, the traveler expectations, on the other hand, they are really what I'm seeing in multiple polls, multiple information coming from various sources, is they want to know what options are available to them ahead of time and clearly spelled out. This is probably one of the key things that we can do as an industry of improving. Just making sure, whether it's business travel, whether you're using an online booking tool or calling an agent, or a leisure traveler, just being able to see, what's available to you. And then make payment easier. I want to prepay, or I don't want to have to pay by cash only. I want to use credit. I want to use debit. Make it easy to pay, and also list it on my itinerary. Because a lot of times you book travel, and if you're diligent, you book travel sometimes many months or many weeks ahead of when you're going to travel, and you forget that you actually purchased a meal, or you forget you purchased, Wi-Fi ahead of time if you can actually do that. Those type of things. So you want it listed on your itinerary. Those are expectations that are popping up first and foremost. And it's interesting. I mean, we did a recent press release, and we did a study with the IdeaWorks company from an Amadeus standpoint, and ancillary revenue will reach $36.1 billion in 2012. This industry, this whole ancillary revenue, whether it's hotels, airlines, and specifically the airlines, has grown so fast. It is a major source of revenue now. It can't be ignored, and really it's the filtering and trying to hone that revenue source and continue to grow it is going to be on top of travel industry minds for years to come. Let's go to the next slide, Kevin. So we have the business traveler specifically has a dilemma, right? First of all, the other frustration that I didn't mention on the last page was the please remember me dilemma. And when I talk to business travelers and go out and do polls or talk to people, just casual, whether it's acquaintances or actually do it, I'm trying to seek information, this one always comes up. It's like, why can't, different aspects of industry suppliers just remember who I am, what I did last time, what I purchased, what I didn't, and my buying patterns? It kind of goes back to the poll question. Over 50% on the poll question said, people are really willing or eager or indifferent about providing information. And I think it goes to the root of this, that if I'm providing my information and you're capturing information, whether it's for consumerization or anything else, then use the information. How frustrating is it, that I've traveled, 36 times on one airline this year, and they still don't remember my preferences, or they keep asking me for the same information over and over again. Use it, please. Or to expense or not expense. This one goes directly to the traveler, the business traveler. It also touches the travel manager, as we'll get to on the next slide. But to expense or not expense, policies, have to stay up to speed with the different proliferation of choices for unbundled travel. And that's a really daunting task for a lot of travel managers, and I completely understand it, especially as the airlines are trying to mix and match. As Scott mentioned, the predictive bundling, the bundling of unbundled travel. What combinations are going to be out there? What can you expense? What can you not expense? It's a huge item on budgets for many corporations now. Besides just air, car, hotel, is what other services did you purchase or can you purchase during the course of a trip? Yeah, and then we've got the last one, right? The partially functional online booking tool, or self-booking tool, or however you want to call it. I mean, they're always going to be playing catch-up. So this is an area that I see is going to change, radically, and has not changed very much, unfortunately, in the last 3 or 4 years. Lacking significant products and services of what you can buy. You see, content disparities. You see completeness of the itinerary. You go to online booking tool, but when you get your itinerary, you may not show everything that you actually purchased. And the ability to change a reservation, and not just change a reservation in terms of your flight sequence or your destination or time or anything else. It's to change the reservation based on, I decided I don't want that meal, or I don't want that seat upgrade, or those type of things. The ability to do that is very confusing. So let's go to the next slide, Kevin. So we've got the travel manager. I mean, obviously, from a business side, they have as much pain as the business traveler on this one. The policies, are out of control, right? Is there a different policy for every service or every bundled offering? What are the impacts of bundling on a corporation's budget, and how does that show up in the reporting or MIS systems that we have out there today? The constant change is something that I mentioned earlier is really difficult to keep up with. Reporting itself, is really all about data, and data, turning data into information, and having the information, early enough in the process to see what people are doing and make policy changes to affect, the bundled and unbundled services and the policies around those, is going to be key. of course, tying expense systems together. Some expense systems, actually many expense systems out there, don't even have the option to actually expense, those some specific type of bundles. So the travelers are saying, how do I do that? So with that, obviously the last one is the impact on supplier negotiations. And when you think about that, if you're a large corporation and you want to track those unbundled services, you want to find out what your traveler is paying for, what they're not paying for, because that can definitely go into leverage, on both sides of the equation, for purchasing services, getting better rates in the future. So let's go to the next slide.
Which is, we're going to have another poll, which kind of leads us nicely on and to where we've just been. So, and this is the last of the polls, I hasten to add. So, here we go then. On a scale of 1 to 5, or 1 to 3 actually in this case, how frustrated are you as a consumer? So put your consumer hats back on, guys, with the complexity of unbundled travel products. So a scale of 1 to 3 here. Extremely frustrated, somewhat frustrated. I prefer the choice it provides no matter how complex. Apologies for saying 1 to 5 when it really was 1 to 3. So, and this is pretty unanimous at the moment. We'll get you to comment on this, Brian, in a second, whether it does chime in with what you're seeing and thinking. Oh, but a last minute rush on the somewhat frustrated. So let me just throw up the results here. So just 10% of you say you're extremely frustrated. Just over half say I prefer the choice it offers, no matter, and 39% say somewhat frustrated. Brian, thoughts on that? The results of those polls before we dive back into your presentation there.
Yeah, actually, it doesn't surprise me, right? So you almost have, if you look at the top two and the bottom ones, from a frustrated, somewhat frustrated, or extremely, so 50-50. To me, that's unacceptable. If you have close to 50%, of travelers, we're making a huge generalization here, that have frustration in the choices that are out there, not knowing the frustration. To me, that number should be down around, 10-15% to be acceptable.
Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it. Of course, there's never any harm in providing choice. But that's the issue. Is I think a lot of people on this call, specifically who are in the industry, know how to navigate through what the choices are. The issue is those people who don't travel that frequency and those type of things. Generally, I think if you did that with a bunch, with people that are less frequent travelers, I think that number goes up a lot higher on the extremely frustrated side.
Yeah, and I guess this is why there is this degree of educating required around the industry to kind of not only think about how it's good to work on your ancillary products and raise your own revenues, but really kind of understand or try and think about how this affects the consumer and how they're trying to decipher all this inherent chaos associated with this.
Well, the point I would offer, guys, is that if the airline analytical engine gets smart enough, it will offer bundles to these travelers that will reduce their frustration, because those offers will actually meet their needs pretty quickly and pretty obviously. So I think that the opportunity to drive the frustration out of the equation is pretty high.
Excellent. Okay, right. Let's go back into, and thanks there, Scott. So let's go back into your slides there. Brian, over to you, sir.
So let's talk about where we're going with unbundled travel services and some of the paths that we see coming up. Obviously, I think the primary path today is the supplier direct solution. I don't have the number in front of me, but I would say the vast majority, and we're talking somewhere in the 80 to 90% range of unbundled ancillary type services are purchased supplier direct. Now you have what we call the EMD, the electronic miscellaneous document type, which actually goes through the GDS. So and it does actually meet the needs, especially for travel agents, to be able to serve their constituents, and be able to allow them to purchase some of these ancillary services. That's starting to grow in numbers, and I would say it's still a fraction, though, a very, very small fraction of the overall unbundled services that are purchased in travel actually go through EMDs. It still remains to be seen, on how much the adoption is there. I think that it's a nice, elegant solution because it uses the systems that have been around for the last 30 or 40 years. But the question is, those systems are also basically going to be retired over some point as well. So the question is that still, how long is that going to be viable? How much will it grow? The one that's actually popping up that I see slowly, but I think will actually gain a lot of traction is the supplier API solution, where a lot of suppliers, whether it's airlines, hotels, other folks, actually can have APIs or application programmer interfaces that allow them to extend their look and feel, their functionality to other systems to basically allow the purchase of ancillary or unbundled services, so they can still actually control the purchase process and maybe even direct payment and other things, but actually it's an API that they've extended out, whether it has graphics to it or it's behind the scenes, and allow the third party, whoever they're connecting to actually create a graphic, but it actually provides all the choices and the pricing, and that gives them control of what the purchase process is. So I see that starting to pop up. Now, of course, fare families are something that Scott mentioned, and I believe those are actually starting to really take new significance, where people are getting more information about what services people like and don't like. And now I can see specifically airlines starting to bundle, specific services or ancillary services together, for like an economy comfort seat plus, a free beverage plus something else is now, a bundle that you get with one type of fare. I think that will be, for the next, number of years, I think we're going to start to see a proliferation of that as well. Also, I see online booking tools, online travel agencies, the interfaces you go to will actually have to accommodate those fare families as well, which is going to create a lot of change within the industry as well. Now, also system integration and direct system integration, with supplier systems, between airline IT and the GDS, or airline IT and the front office, or the direct sales systems, the online booking tools. I see that actually opening up more integrations between those over the long period of time. But I'll tell you that the key one is data collection, because ultimately it comes down to, if you're a traveler, business traveler, you're a travel manager, you want to understand the data to be able to make decisions about it. The suppliers need to understand the data to do better bundles, or better have understanding what's going to work, what's working and not working with ancillary services. So data collection really becomes the key. Of course, we need to share data much more freely within this industry, and kind of take off some of the my data versus your data. If you look at the numbers at the bottom, it's really, you can see what I was talking about a little earlier, is that the worldwide estimate of ancillary revenue is growing considerably and will continue to grow. And this is a phenomenal source of revenue, for suppliers within this industry, and for good reason. I mean, there's a lot of value. If there's value behind the products, then the revenue will continue to grow. Let's go to the next slide, Kevin. So let's talk about technology for a second, kind of bring it in. I mentioned earlier, it is all about the data, access and sharing, privacy and compliance. We had the totally creepy poll earlier. That is significant in the way that data privacy, compliance, those type of things are first and foremost, and systems have to be hardened enough to be able to not let your private data out. And different countries have definitely different laws regarding that as well. It's very complex when you really dig into that. Yeah, we're talking a lot about big data. Yeah, and big data is not a new concept. It's really a new coined term. It talks about taking a look at aggregated metadata, comparing it to benchmarks, really looking at it in the context of doing true analysis. But it's also about small data, the individual data. As I mentioned earlier, the remember me data. But data is also about being timely and accurate. One of the problems that we've had for years in this industry, and we still have it to some extent, to some respect, is that the data that we have, because it's been largely in a lot of unformatted fields and loose, what I call loose data, really hasn't been able to, the quality hasn't been as high as other industries, over the same period of time. And I think that's being solved. So, but the next-gen booking tools is also really interesting from a technology standpoint. I think the writing's clearly on the wall. Everything's going to be mobile and fully functional. And when I say fully functional, you have a booking tool, which really, if you look at the next one, it's the evolution of the travel tool. It's not a booking tool anymore. Your tool is going to become a travel tool. So yes, it allows you to do the purchase process, to do the booking, to do the searching, but it also follows you, and your tool is going to provide you information during the trip, while you're on the trip, after the trip, to be able to look at historical data. It's not just a separate tool for each one of these functions. You know, the mobility and the tool that you carry along with you has to be a combination of many tools that are out on the market today. You know, and the power really becomes in the hands of the traveler, or the power to the people, where if you want to share your information, it should be your choice whether to do that or not. You know, and ultimately we're going to get to that model. Of course, we're looking out on the horizon here, you know, but I do believe that most booking tools that are on the market today are lacking, and the next generation will prove to be much more viable for a whole trip for a traveler. You know, be much more better. Social and more. Interesting. Unbundled products are starting to see more of social chatter around ancillary services and unbundled products. You know, if you look out on the social networks and kind of do some data mining, you'll see a lot of the services are like, you know, they talk about this airline's, you know, beef jerky that one airline sells tastes like, you know, tire rubber, you know, or something like that. You see some of these things coming out, so you're starting to see social impacts. But I actually see that even when corporations, you know, start to invest and have their own internal social networks, we can then get a lot of pros and cons and feedback and opinions about specific services which should be purchased and what shouldn't be. And there's also multiple payment mechanisms will exist. We have, you know, right now, if you look at the consumerization of how travel is going, especially with unbundled services, it really, you mirror some of the stuff done in the retail industry or some of the other, you know, industries that are out there, how you can pay in multiple ways, whether it's online, it's direct, it's at the time of purchase, or at the time of sale, or when you're traveling, those type of things. So, and really, applications, right now we live in a world of apps, especially on the mobile side. But apps become the new widgets. Just as websites really turned into portals, you know, apps will become the new widgets, and you'll start to see a new breed of tools, and this might be the travel tool of the future, where really it's a combination of multiple applications from multiple providers that really becomes the new widgets that make the travel, and they should be seamless, and they should have common look and feels, or integration, or common sign-on. Those are the type of things that we're going to get to. I mean, if you think about it, you know, within 2016, we're going to have 5 billion people in this world that have mobile broadband. And that's just the pace that it's going right now, so it's all going to be mobile. Let's go to the next. Go on, Kevin. So some conclusions here. Traveler frustration, as you mentioned, is still continuing to drive change. You know, you saw that in the poll that we did. You know, I think it's still too high, and I think we haven't got it right from an unbundled services. I think that it will drive change, and then ultimately it will get to a point where people are pretty happy with the choices that they have, and the frustration level will go down over the next few years. I think if you're TMC, if you're an agency or TMC, you have to adapt. I mean, the needs of the travel manager are changing considerably. They need more data. They need more detailed data. They need more timely data. They need better advice on which applications the travelers should be using and not using. You know, because it goes back to unbundled services, they need also advice on setting policies, and they need somebody to help track with the changing nature of unbundled services to help them actually deal with the changing nature of travel. I think leisure travelers will, as Scott mentioned, he's right on the mark. Leisure travelers will continue to have an increasing number of choices for travel products. I see a reduction in those choices, or more bundles for business travelers. So Scott and I came up with the exact same conclusion through a different path. Technology will make selecting, tracking, and bundled services easier. I think that's absolutely true. It's going to be easier to see what you have, what your choices are, compare and contrast what you get from different suppliers. It's all there. You can't do that easy today, but you will be able to do it in the future. Those tools will pop up that allow you to do that. And obviously sharing data across the travel plan will be the key driver. right now, like as I mentioned earlier, we don't share data well. We're starting to. There's a lot of initiatives now to start opening up data and passing it across our supply chain, like many other industries have done that are very healthy. So that's what I have for today. Kevin, over to you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Brian, as always. So we have just over 10 minutes or so. We've also got Gene Quinn joining us from his mobile phone. Hopefully he can hear us and he'll chime in a second. And we've got quite a few questions that have come through from our audience. Thank you very much to everybody that has chimed in. One that came in straight away that I thought was quite interesting, and we need to go and get this. I think we need to tackle this one straight away. And this is, I guess, to both of you, Scott and Brian. Scott, if you want to go first. This came from. I will get the name in a second, but this came from Dan Dimitrio. I hope Dan of Pan Dimitrio. I beg your pardon. I hope I've got your surname pronounced correctly there, Pan. You asked. Brian mentioned that less frequent travellers are more likely to be frustrated. However, the graphs we saw from Scott imply that less frequent travellers have a lower cost of time. So how can we, if there is, explain what the paradox here? So Scott, do you want to, because seeing as he kind of singles out your slides here, do you want to kind of chime in on this one?
Yes, thanks very much. Well, I don't know that necessarily my graph spoke to the frequency of traveler, how often a traveler might take a trips during the year. But I think your point, Dan, is good, that, and it jives very much with what Brian is saying. The less frequent traveler, be he business or leisure, is much more likely to be confused by the options. And to the extent that they are a leisure traveler and they have a relatively low value placed on their own shopping time, you can expect them to want to sort through the options. Even though they may not be happy to do so in terms of the amount of time that it does take, it's still better that they spend their time doing that to get exactly the right price for the bundle that they want. They have to self-assemble that bundle, as opposed to being forced to buy a bundle that doesn't quite meet their needs, and therefore they feel like they've wasted some money on some elements there. So I'm not sure it's a paradox. I actually think it's consistent. I would just underscore Brian's point that there's plenty of opportunity for improving the traveler experience by making those discrete components that are offered to travelers better, in effect, better bundled to still reduce their time.
And just on, before we get Brian's reaction to that, I mean, kind of another question that came in around your kind of rules that you were talking about, and this came from Brent Garbach, who says, to a certain extent, is Southwest an exception in some degree to some of those rules, in that it does kind of, it's almost like the Ryanair model. It does things with its own kind of decision-making, and inherently some of their travellers behave in a different way. So is Southwest a kind of a contradiction to some of those rules, arguably?
I think Southwest is a brilliant marketer. I think they've achieved the perception in the marketplace that they've actually got the best of both worlds. They've got the lowest fares, and they're giving you plenty of free things. So why do you need to spend time looking anywhere else? But in fact, you are forced to accept some of their bundles. You do, one way or the other, you are paying for somebody else's bags when you don't take a bag on.
Indeed. Okay, Gene, you there? Did you want to? Yeah, go for it, sir.
Yeah, Kev, I don't know whether Brian wanted to chime in on that last question, but it sounds like we hit that one pretty hard. Brian, I actually had a question regarding your presentation about the importance of data sharing and the inevitability of APIs becoming the way for consumers to get into this multiplicity of offers. My notes, even though I'm stuck here without a computer today in Connecticut, my notes told me that on the audience poll, we had 10% think that the frequent flyer partner mile program was 10% of ancillary revenue. But I recall the pie chart that you and IdeaWorks released yesterday said it was actually 50% of the revenues from the products available. And even if it's not exactly that number, my question is this. On a frequent flyer partner program between a credit card company like an American Express and an airline like a Delta, one would imagine there's already an enormous amount of data sharing and cooperation going on between and among the various entities in those organizations. and in the consumer privacy releases they had to get to sign up for those services, those credit cards and that service. So could you look at the frequent flyer partner programs, loyalty programs as they exist today as either a benchmark or a leading indicator on how this data sharing can occur or in fact will occur?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Gene. Yes, so I mean, and this is one of the reasons why, you know, the prediction of that data sharing, you know, will continue to happen. It'll get better and make life easier for everybody because it's already starting to happen in some aspects or pockets of this industry, right? I mean, you mentioned one specifically between some of the credit card companies and suppliers, but that's only one aspect of the supply chain. Really, for really a healthy industry, you need it from the supplier side to those folks that sit in the middle of the supply chain, whether that you consider that to be third-party technology providers, GDSs, you know, other people that hold inventory, and then ultimately what I call in the front part of the supply chain, which are the agencies and the corporations and the travel managers and the folks, you know, that are actually in the right in front next to the consumer, whether it's a business traveler or a leisure traveler. You know, so what we need is the information to flow upstream and downstream better. But I would say there's definitely pockets that is showing improvement or really, really healthy, you know, exchange of information. But the other thing is the way we exchange information. If you look at our industry compared to other industries, we're starting to get into, you know, better web services and passing information electronically, but we still do a lot of FTP, EDI, you know, old style communications, and that's probably got to change as well.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Gene. There, and changing tack just a little bit. This one, I guess, is for you, Scott. This is a question that came in from Rob Wortham, who was going back to the kind of the question that we asked about people using the social graph data, and he says it'd be interesting to actually split that poll by geographic region to see if there's a correlation between region and eagerness to be targeted. And I think there's a perception that there is generally a difference in terms of generations, but are you seeing anything geographically that would, you know, are people in certain countries or regions more or less inclined to be willing to share their social data, or is it just a little bit too early for that in your mind?
I think there's a general presumption that Europeans are probably more conservative about their data privacy, but I think the fundamental driver of this will be how do airlines execute on the use of personal data. If they do it in a responsible and effective way that brings value to the consumers, they'll get a lot farther, regardless of the geography. But if they, you know, if they blow it, if they make some mistakes and make some, you know, egregious errors in their use of personal data, you know, it's going to set them back again without regard to geography.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let me answer that one as well, Kevin, because we did a study at Amadeus called Chaos Collaboration last year, and we actually did a little bit of that. We looked at, I believe, 6 or 7 different regions or countries in the world, and we did see some difference culturally on willing to share data. We also saw a major difference, you know, from an age when you bracket it by age. Right? It looks like the younger generation is much more open to sharing their data than the older generation.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Great question here from, and once again, I do hope I get the surname pronounced correctly, Arvo Hartikainen. Good afternoon, Arvo. And Arvo asks, with the industry as complex as it is, with suppliers and intermediaries all in the position of gathering personal data and creating customer, you know, profiles, isn't the regular, infrequent traveller still going to be in a position where his preferences are unknown and he or she will have to choose to be loyal to an airline or a particular intermediary in order to get all these personalised travel products? So I guess this is really looking at the leisure traveller, isn't it? So guys, who wants to chime in on this one?
Well, what I see emerging on that is new tools that actually combine your business profile and your leisure profile. You know, and so as I mentioned, it's really the power to the people or power to the traveler. And today's profile systems are usually held either by a corporation or an agency or some, you know, third-party system, and or the supplier themselves have your own profile. What I see now it's more of a ubiquitous profile system where you on your mobile device have your profile and you share that with whoever the supplier is, so they should know. And actually it tracks a lot of things like frequent flyer miles or other loyalty program statistics, plus your preferences or what you like, even preferences on services.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Scott, go ahead.
Just extend that a bit to offer a conclusion that as infrequent travelers learn of these opportunities to improve their shopping experiences by populating kind of a universal traveler profile, we should expect them to do so. But many, many, many infrequent travelers just still will never be sophisticated enough to appreciate that. So I think what that forces the airlines to do and other travel suppliers is to continue to offer a lot of unbundled options for those individual travelers that really want to sort through the mix and the mess.
Okay, we're just got a couple of minutes to go here, so we're just going to rattle through a final few questions here. Robert Cole asks, in the future, will travel sellers, A, be more inclined to provide a total tax-inclusive price for bundled services, or B, promote products on an a la carte basis, excluding tax and fees, in an attempt to present the lowest possible price to a consumer? Question mark.
I think their economic preference, the supplier's economic preference, would be to promote untaxed products, be they bundled or not. But regulatory environments may dictate the answer to that question.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree with Scott on that one.
Okay. So let's get to the final question here. So, I guess it's the topic of the moment. Brian, we're going to go to you on this one, as soon as you are with Amadeus. Paul Byrne here asks, how do you think the noises coming out of IATA recently with its NDC initiative will affect suppliers' unbundling and user choices? You can tread diplomatically or undiplomatically around this one as you like, but we're interested to hear what you've got to say.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one to answer. I think I'm gonna stay away from that one because it's still. I would say it's still for me, and from speaking for Amadeus, we don't want to go down a specific path, and I don't want to say it specifically on this format as well, and have something be create an internal issue.
No, that's fine. It's just that we have had 3 or 4 people ask the very same question, so that's why I thought I would throw it in there. We're right up on the hour, guys. We do have a couple of questions that we didn't have a chance to answer. So what I'm going to do now is save all those questions, and I will distribute those around to the panel. So sorry if you didn't get your question answered right now, but we will send this around to the panel, and hopefully one or both of them will come back to you all individually with your questions. So, as I said before, thank you very much to those that took part in the polls, which was almost about 90% of you every single time, so great. We have recorded the entire webinar, and the slides, both Scott and Brian's slides, and the recording we will put onto a post onto Tnooz.com in the next, as we always try and do, within the next 12 to 24 hours. Feel free to then share that link round to your colleagues. I think we had over 300 of you registered today, so thank you very much for those that did attend. We're obviously very conscious of there's some interesting difficulties going on in the travel industry today, not least around logistics and operations. So thank you very much to those of you that did manage to tune in. It goes last of all then for me to say thank you so much to Scott Gillespie and Brian Beard for their great stuff. Brian especially because he's from Amadeus, our partner on this. We always enjoy working with Brian and Amadeus, but especially Scott. We thought what we heard from you today was brilliant, and I'm sure the audience did as well. So last of all then, thank you very much to everybody for listening in. Thanks again to Amadeus, to Brian and to Scott, and have a good day to you all. I hope the storms calm down if you're on the East Coast. And thanks ever so much, and goodbye.
Thank you.